So the gospel of Mark is the good news of Jesus Christ, the Son of God. That is verse 1 of Mark 1, and that is everything that you need to know is right there in that verse. But today we're going to kind of get into the good news part. As we kind of left off in chapter 10, Jesus is getting to his final hours. He's left Capernaum, the Galilee area that was kind of like the base of his ministry operations. It's where most of the disciples are from. He's now moving. Every step he takes is a step towards his death, towards Jerusalem is what he's doing. We pick up in verse 32 of Mark 10. They were on their way up to Jerusalem, with Jesus leading the way, and the disciples were astonished, while those who followed were afraid. Again, he took the 12 aside, and he told them what was going to happen to him. "We're going up to Jerusalem," he said, "and the Son of Man will be delivered over to the chief priests and the teachers of the law. They will condemn him to death and will hand him over to the Gentiles, who will mock him and spit on him, flog him and kill him. 3 days later, he will rise." So just the context here again. On the journey, this is the common way of referring to Jerusalem. Whenever they said they were going up to Jerusalem, that's not just a metaphor. That's actually physically. Jerusalem is like a city on a hill. And it doesn't matter which direction or which angle you come to Jerusalem, you're going uphill to Jerusalem. That's how much it sits on a hill. So you could see militarily, it's strategically placed on a hill, but this is the place that Jesus is going to be crucified. He is going up a hill, and he's going to die on that hill, is what he's doing. What's interesting about this, it says Jesus is leading the way. So if you knew everything about your death and you were marching towards your death, you'd think you'd almost be in the back of the pack. You'd be dragging your feet, like not really wanting to go. But Jesus is like the opposite here is happening. He's like out in front. People are behind him. He is leading the way. You just see this deliberateness of what Jesus is doing. There's the physical side of this, and there's kind of the spiritual side. This is what we want. We want Jesus to lead the way in our life. We want to follow him. He's physically doing it here, but spiritually, we want to follow him. So it says here the disciples were astonished. And we're not really given much context into what that means. So if you will allow me, I'm just going to conjecture a little bit at this point. I don't think it means that yes, they're going up a hill and they're like, wow, Jesus is really physically fit. He's not winded. We're all back here gassed. I don't think that's what it means. I think it more could be that Jesus was going with such determination to his death. At this point, he had already told them twice that he's going up to Jerusalem to die. And he is just leading the way, and he's not sluggish about it. It also could be the sense that our sin is so great, yet Jesus still wants to die for us. His love for us, despite our sin, is so great, and yet he's still going, and that's astonishing. Maybe that's what they're thinking, maybe not. The fact that Jesus is just willing to walk right into danger, right into hostility, just with so much determination and just conviction and resolution in his steps. Jesus had planned to do this. He had planned to be there for this reason. So this is maybe what's so awe-striking about it. It's also interesting to think about the fact that we're a sinful people. We're desperately in need of a Savior. Jesus could have just judged the earth, judged us where we stand, condemn us where he is, but instead, he wants to go die for us. Maybe that's pretty awesome. We don't really know. Mark doesn't mention it. We don't have a good sense of what the astonishment is all about. So I'm just going to leave you with those thoughts off the top of my head. The other thing that's going on here, so Mark skips what the other parallel Gospels talk about. What's happened probably likely before this happened is Jesus has resurrected Lazarus from the grave. Mark is one of the Gospels that doesn't mention it. So from this point on, that event has kind of occurred. So you have to kind of keep that in the context here. So maybe there's a little bit of astonishment because, again, they know the hostility. They saw the hostility. There's also probably murmurings in the crowds. Because at that event, if you recall, when Lazarus was raised from the grave, some, were all in. They're like, this guy can resurrect the dead. I'm following him, right? But others did not react that way. In fact, they reacted the opposite way. They were like, I want to kill him because he did that. Surprisingly, that's what there was really not a neutral ground there. It was either a really positive reaction or it was a really negative reaction. It was what kind of happened at the end of that narrative. So there's a sense here that all these crowds, they're all going to Jerusalem because The Jews at this time were going there for Passover, so there's caravans of Jewish people going. Maybe this sense of danger was possibly spreading out. And they knew about this ominous thing that was going on, because it says, while those who followed were afraid. So this is not the disciples, this is just yet people in the caravans and crowds coming. Again, we're not really given a whole lot of detail, but I think if you combine this with the story of Lazarus, maybe we have a better insight, and maybe these people sensed the danger. They sensed somehow there was some kind of ominous thing going on here. There's an idea, like I put this tornado in there. There's like awe. When you look at a tornado, it's awesome. We've seen on the news this week like how it's devastated some of the Midwest. But there's a sense of like fear as well. Like it's awesome, but we're afraid of it at the same time. And I feel like that's kind of the sentiment that's going on here. There's this awesomeness that Jesus is awesome, but there's also this fear, this danger that's kind of looming about. So Jesus continues again, and then as is usual, he takes them aside. He takes his disciples. Whenever you see the word, takes them aside. This is like a private conversation that he's having just with his disciples, whenever you see that word aside. So this is the third time in Mark's gospel, at least, that we have recorded that Jesus is about to tell them this experience that he's going to have. Now, he may have said it numerous times. I mean, we really don't know, but we know at least from the recorded path that Mark has taken us down. This is the third time. The first time was in chapter 8. The second time is chapter 9. Now we're in chapter 10. It's the third time we see it come up. And you see the elements are kind of the same. In chapter 8, he talks about his suffering, his being rejected, and the fact that it's the religious establishment that is the ones that are wanting to kill him. So they're quite aware of this at this point. They've seen the tension. They've seen the arguments. They've seen the hostility. They've seen the Pharisees trying to trap Jesus at this point. There's just a fever pitch to this tension right now. They see in chapter 9, you see the words delivered. He's kind of vague in chapter 9. He doesn't actually mention the religious establishment, but you can kind of fill in the gaps. He's already said it once, so they probably figured out. But every time he says emphatically, I'm going to be killed. I'm going to be murdered. He's not taking that away. Now, each time there was a little bit of a different reaction. The first time when Jesus says this, Peter takes Jesus aside and starts to rebuke Jesus, which in some ways is kind of humorous. Like, you're going to really tell God that he's got it wrong? Of course not. And Jesus kind of rebukes him back and says, hey, get behind me. He says, you know what? You're doing the work of Satan. If you don't understand this, like, I have to go to the cross. I have to go to the cross. If I don't go to the cross, you're doing the work of Satan. It's kind of the mentality that he says. So the second time he says this, it says in chapter 9 that they were fearful. And there was like a lack of understanding, and they were too afraid to ask him about it. So instead of rejecting, or instead of like objecting to this idea of dying, they were afraid. And it's not like they didn't understand dying. I think they understood the concept of dying. I think what they didn't understand is the kind of Messiah that Jesus was becoming for them. And that was hard for them to wrap around their head. Because the kind of Messiah they were looking for was the one that kind of like a monarch, a king that just comes in and reigns. So they're just afraid to ask at this point, like, what's going to happen after you resurrect? A little bit. But after that second time, they start debating about who's going to be the greatest among them. Right? It's kind of this weird contrast between, like, Jesus, I'm going to die, and then, hey, yeah, that's great, Jesus, but who's the greatest among us? I mean, it's just kind of silly that that's the occasion that has come up. And the third time is really kind of no different. The details after this kind of unfold similar way. The word delivered there, the way it's being used twice here, I think it implies the betrayal from within. I think the fact that there's this idea that somebody's going to deliver Jesus to this religious establishment that's looking to hunt him down almost implies that what's going on there. The other thing that's happening here that's different from the other times is Jesus is providing more detail. If you notice, like, he goes through the religious establishment, and then he says it's handed over to the Gentiles. He didn't mention that before. He has never mentioned that. Now all of a sudden he's saying, not only are the religious leaders the part of the reason I'm getting killed, he's going to give me over to the Gentiles. And that typically in their minds, they're thinking Rome, right? The Roman soldiers are going to take charge of him. Those are the Gentiles at the time. Those were the guys that were in charge. But then he goes into the details, like the nitty-gritties of his death. He's like, they're going to mock me. They're going to spit on me. They're going to flog me. And then they're going to execute me. This is the unprecedented. These details are just coming out. He's painting this complete picture of just utter rejection is what's going to happen to him. Now, he doesn't tell them these details the first 2 times. Why? Probably because they couldn't handle it. They really didn't react well the first time. The second time, they were a little confused and didn't ask any questions. The third time, we'll see in a second. But he's painting this picture of utter rejection. The people that should have received them, the people that should have known most about their scriptures, the people that read their Bible, if you will, the people that should have, that really, when you think of the priest back then, they were like your access to God. These guys knew God better than anybody, right? Yet, when God was among them, they didn't recognize him, which is a scary thought. Like, you can know everything about your Bible, you can show up in church and still miss God. How is that possible? These guys, in fact, they didn't just miss God, they actually wanted to kill him. They were jealous of him, right? And it was purely out of jealousy that the religious leaders were coming after him. When they saw the resurrection of Lazarus, that should have been a turning point. Some of them should have been like, hey, this guy has the power over the grave. I should follow after him. And I don't care what I was thinking before. This guy's legit. That should have been their train of thought. Instead, it was that was the moment that sealed their conviction. We got to kill this guy. We can't let him go resurrecting people. Like, that's bad for our business kind of thing. It's like almost what they're thinking, right? So the thing I think that Mark is really getting at, the takeaway that I think from all these little details and the fact that Jesus is predicting all this is the omniscience of God. That is a fancy word of just saying God just knows everything that's coming and what's going on. And he puts it on full display. And this is not the first time we see this display of omniscience of Jesus. When he was calling Nathanael, he goes up to Nathanael, he says, I saw you under the fig tree. And Nathanael's response is kind of like, whoa, only me and myself were out there. Only a God-like person could know these details. And then in Luke, you see Simon Peter, he's fishing all day. He can't catch anything. And Jesus says, hey, cast the net on this side. And he has this miraculous catch. And then you see another time with Peter, same thing. They need to go pay the temple tax. And he goes and he tells Peter, go catch a fish. He's going to have a coin in his mouth. It's like, these are pretty amazing moments, right? Like, so during his conversation with the Samaritan woman, Jesus reveals details about her life, including her current, marriage status. And she's a marvel. She's like, how does this guy know all this stuff? He has the capacity of knowing things that other people don't know. Even with the story of Lazarus, before he went up there, the disciples are like, well, just let him sleep. He's going to rest. He's going to be, no, I mean, he's dead. Like, he knew before the announcement even got there that Lazarus had passed away. And he says, I'm glad I wasn't there for your sake, because he was about to go perform the greatest miracle yet for them. Some of them hadn't seen anything like that. So it was shocking to them. So he had knowledge beyond human capacity. And I think Mark is trying to kind of drill us down and kind of give us that thought and that mentality. Jesus knew things that only God could know, quite frankly. So what does this mean for us in context of the crucifixion narrative? Well, he is now marching to his death, upon which he probably knows every single detail of every single moment of every single second, right? That's pretty powerful to think about. If he's omniscient and he knows it all, he knows exactly what's going to happen to him. If he can know the catch of a fish at the right exact second with a coin in his mouth, he knows every piercing, every blow, every spit, every mock, everything that's going to happen to him. And it makes you kind of wonder if you're thinking, like, here is God in human form. He's fully divine, fully God, and he's the infinite God of the universe, and he can think about what's coming. And you tend to wonder, like, how often did he think about it? I suppose an infinite God could think about his death an infinite amount of times. I don't know. But the fact that he thought about it, he knew it, he saw it was coming, and he's marching to it. There is no hesitancy. He is marching up this hill and he's getting after it. The other thing that I think is impressive, though, is each time he says, I'm going to die, he also says, I'm going to rise each time. He doesn't hide that fact. Why does he keep marching? Well, it's because he loves us, right? You bet he does. Of course he loves us. That's why he's doing this. Not only does he love us, he says it 3 times, we're going to rise. I'm going to rise again. Why does this matter, or why do we care so much about a resurrection? This is the grand question that Christians need to ask ourselves. Why do we care so much about a resurrection? Why does that fold into something that we care about? I think John 11 kind of just says it well. because Jesus is saying this during the whole Lazarus event when he's talking to Mary and Martha. He says, I am the resurrection and the life. The one who believes in me, he will live. Even though they die, whoever lives by believing in me will never die. Do you believe this? In other words, Jesus is marching to his grave. Even though he dies, he will live on. How does he live on? Well, we know from hindsight that he resurrected. So why does that matter to us? Because we can trust when Jesus says, when he dies and lives again, and then he tells us that we can die and live again, that you can take it to the bank, that you absolutely can trust it. If Jesus can do it, he can raise us from the grave as well. And that's why it matters to us. Because even though we may die, we trust him that he'll resurrect us and we will live forever. Jesus died and rose again, so we believe that God will bring Jesus, those who have fallen asleep again. This is the words of Paul. Paul is trying to give us this impression that, like, why we look at the resurrection and the death and resurrection so hard is because of Jesus, we can trust that it's going to happen to us as well. In 1 Corinthians, he says, for since death came through a man, the resurrection of dead comes also through a man. If Jesus is the power to resurrect himself, he has the power to resurrect us. These are the things that we hang upon. This is where we put our Christian hope in. This is why this matters so much, right? So the story continues. And this is kind of the reaction, I guess, maybe not the reaction, but this is what immediately follows this conversation about his death. He announces it, and you'll notice some similarities here between this and the other first two times. Then James and John, the son of Zebedee, came to him. Teacher, they said, we want you to do for us whatever we ask. Oh, what do you want me to do for you? He asked. They replied, let one of us sit on your right hand and let the other of us sit on your left in your glory. You don't know what you're asking, Jesus said. Can you drink the cup I drink or be baptized the baptism I am baptized with? We can, they answered. Jesus said to them, you will drink the cup I drink and be baptized with the baptism I am baptized with, but to sit at my right and my left, it is not for me to grant. These places belong to those for whom they have been prepared. So, interesting conversation. Like, the idea of greatness hasn't escaped James and John, has it? Right? These lessons about greatness and how he keeps trying to tell them these things. Like, again, Jesus, all-knowing, he indulges their question, which I find amazing. We should be encouraged, the fact that Jesus takes on these questions, right? The fact that Jesus doesn't just judge him right where they stand. In the parallel accounts, you see Salome, the mother of James and John, seems to have her hand in this as well, right? Like, and she's putting these boys up to it a little bit. It really doesn't matter who is actually asking the question. What they're doing is they're demonstrating like a true failure to really comprehend the significance of like Christ's sufferings going forward. Like, they're missing that. When they're asking this, there's this impending crisis that's coming upon them, and yet they're still thinking about their own greatness is what's going on. The contrast is just like, what? So all of those lessons, again, they seem like they're wasted. No lessons are wasted on us, right? Like, yeah, we may need to hear it multiple times. James and John had to hear it multiple times. You and I need to hear things multiple times. We can have some grace here for these guys. But yet, nonetheless, they're still more concerned. So, some of us are thinking like, well, why not petition for something here at this point? Like, you know he's going up to his death. Hey, why don't they just secure their positions of power so when the resurrection happens, everybody just knows, right? Like, that's a thought process that maybe they went through. The problem is it's shockingly prideful to just request this on the heels of Jesus just announcing his own death and resurrection. It's just completely prideful. I mean, these guys are amazingly loyal, but they're also amazingly misguided and have a serious lack of humility. Like, they always seem to be pressing it. I mean, they're going for it here with this question. They're really going for it. I mean, think about what it's doing. They're putting themselves above the rest of their peers as well. That's what they're asking Jesus to do. Is like, so they're looking at this promotion, I guess, and it's just an ugly heart in the midst of our Lord's final days. Yet the Lord still allows this shallow-hearted question in his presence. And again, I'm grateful because I know in my own walk, I think I've asked plenty of shallow questions of the Lord. But here's the part that I really kind of like, I stumble on verse 36. What do you want me to do for you? Like, Jesus says these words. Like, that's awesome that he says this. Like, he's like, how can I be of help? How can I serve you? Think about this. Solomon, King Solomon, he was troubled, and he asked for wisdom, and the Lord granted wisdom. Others, they asked for healing, and Jesus gave them, and they received healing. When the disciples were confused about prayer, they asked Jesus, can you teach us to pray? And Jesus taught them to pray. When they were confused about parables, Jesus taught them parables. When they asked who is the greatest, Jesus put a child in front of their eyes and said, receive a child like this. This is what greatness looks like. You know, the questions that they seem to ask, Jesus is willing to participate and to answer in. So some questions, they need to be asked more than once. Some questions, Jesus gives an answer before they even ask the question, which I find interesting. Anyhow, they keep asking. There's nothing wrong with asking. It may reveal in your heart that something's wrong, but the question itself, Jesus welcomes it, it seems like. Despite how prideful or shockingly wrong it is, Jesus is never going to say, stop asking me questions. Aren't you comforted by that? Like, aren't you glad that, like, no matter how dumb our heart is or how sinful our mind state might be, that God's not going to say, get away from me. I don't want to hear from you. He's still going to say, come, what do you want from me? Come tell me. He permits them to give voice to his request. And he does the same for us. He permits us to have a voice in our request. So what is their voice? Of course, let us sit on the right, let us sit on the left. These are, these are the highest places of honor in a royal court. They're really going for it all here. I mean, they're just going for it all. They are asking, again, in a sense, who's the greatest among them? Can we be the greatest? Is kind of the thought process here. So the issue of the greatest is clearly not settled, despite what Jesus has been telling them about being humble. The idea there, in your glory, I think that alludes to the fact that James and John got to see Jesus transfigured before their eyes. So there's this idea in their mind, like, this glorious state's coming back at some point. We want to be sitting on your left and right when that glorious state comes back. So what they should have been asking about is, how can we humble ourselves? How can we serve you? Jesus is about to be humblest in his most humble state ever, right? He's about to give his life over the Father's wrath, right? He alludes to this. He says, can you drink the cup I drink? Can you be baptized the baptism I'm about to be baptized? In the midst of their selfish ambition, Jesus is, again, pointing to this idea that there's a cup of wrath coming down here. Like, if you want ambition, you have to drink from a cup of wrath. If you want to be exalted, you have to suffer. There is no exaltation without suffering. That's kind of the big picture of what Jesus is getting here. So absence of anything else, like, you have to empty yourself, is what Jesus is getting to. If you want to receive honor, you have to be ready to endure suffering. And Jesus flat out says, you don't know what you're asking. I think that's a really telling statement. You don't even know what you're asking. And then he says, are you willing to suffer? Are you willing to have a baptism? I think this is like a baptism of blood, is what he's talking about. This is not a, let's go in and get in the Jordan water and come out. This is not that kind of baptism I think he's referring to. This is kind of a reality check that Jesus is giving these guys. He's like, you want greatness? You have to achieve it through humility. And Jesus is about to immerse himself in humility. He's going to immerse himself in the waters of suffering, is what he's going to do. And yet he's still amazingly patient with these people. Even though the question is quite selfish, he's just amazingly patient. If you think about the night of the arrest, that Jesus is arrested, he's praying, and he's praying in drops of blood. And you remember he says, Lord, if this cup, if you can pass it from me, but not my will, but your will. So he's talking about this cup of wrath that's coming. And then when Peter, during the night of the arrest, he pulls out a sword, he cuts Malchus's ear off, and Jesus plants the guy's ears back on, and he turns to Peter, and he says, shall I not drink the cup the Father has prepared for me? Like, Jesus is all about this cup of wrath. He's constantly reminding them, like, I am here to immerse myself in this suffering. And that's what he keeps driving them to. So Verse 39, they say, we can do it. Like, do you think James and John are underestimating the cost to follow Jesus a little bit here? Maybe. Maybe. Do you think we underestimate it, quite frankly? I think we do. But I will tell you this. James was the first of the 12 to be martyred. That's in Acts 12. Herod Agrippa I has him executed. John would be the only disciple that dies of natural causes, but he's exiled to Patmos. He's doing hard labor during Emperor Trajan. Tradition says he died doing hard labor. So to some extent, we know from tradition that these guys will suffer, and they'll willingly suffer. They're not dragging their feet to suffer. They're going to suffer, and they're willing to do it. But interestingly, Jesus' question, he says, but the right and left-hand sides are not for me to grant. In other words, Jesus is not like an earthly monarch. He's really kind of just borrowing that picture. He is the Prince of Heaven. That is a wild distinction and wild difference. The rewards given out are given out by his Father, but he is also divine himself. So this is one of those confusing, mysterious things about the divine nature of Jesus, like the way he points it off to the Father. It almost feels like he's like saying, well, these places aren't for you guys. It's almost like, and this is a nice way of saying it, is almost what it kind of reads to me. We don't know who the places are for. He doesn't answer the question. He doesn't say who's at the left and right. So it doesn't sound like it's them, but it doesn't necessarily sound like it's not them either. Can't necessarily rule anything out here for this comment. But let's think about this. What the positions of right and left, what does it really mean in heaven? Does it mean there's not going to be any crime in heaven. There's not going to be there's no hospitals in heaven. What authority are you really exercising from the right and left-hand side of Jesus? Nothing, right? The only thing that really matters is that we got there. Who cares who sits on the right and left-hand side? Did you make it? That's what matters. That's going to be the big deal. There's going to be nothing but love there. And that's all that really we should care about. All right, so the story continues. They're still walking along, and all of a sudden, the disciples hear about it. Let's read it. So when the 10 heard about this, they became indignant with James and John. Jesus called them together and said, you know that those who are regarded as rulers of Gentiles lord it over them, and their high officials exercise authority over them. Not so with you. Instead, whoever wants to become great among you must be your servant, and whoever wants to be first must be slave of all. For even the Son of Man did not come to be served, but to serve and to give his life as a ransom for many. So were they angry? Of course they were. The others had really an emotional response. Is anyone surprised by this? No. So what's interesting is the root cause of maybe their feelings of this provokedness is the same as the Pharisees, right? Why? Because they're jealous of James and John. The fact that they would ask such things, there's this jealousy now among them. Jealousy is what's going to kill Jesus. The Pharisees are jealous of Jesus. And now within his own camp, he has disciples that are mad at each other. Not a good place to be, right? Good thing they don't go after and kill James and John for this. They actually go out and serve and represent the Lord well. But either way, they're angry. They're resentful of these guys. Again, nobody's really focused on being humble. Nobody's really focused on being obeying. Nobody's really focused on the fact that suffering is what we need to do to follow Christ. That's not the focus of any of these guys. So here's the question I kind of ask myself. Do you find yourself taking the side of the 10 disciples in this? When you read through this story, do you feel indignant as well? Well, I would say don't. Don't feel that way. And here's why I say that. Here's the question. Are you deeply offended by others if they ask God for preferential treatment? Does it bother you when somebody prays that they ask for preferential treatment from God? Let me put it another way. Have you ever asked for preferential treatment from God yourself? The answer is yes, right? So should we take the side of the 10? Should we take the side of James or John? I'd say neither, right? Don't be bitter towards James or John. Don't be bitter towards the 10 that got mad. And quite honestly, when Jesus is arrested, none of them act well, right? They all are self-preservation, right? They all leave his side the night Jesus is arrested. None of them are really praiseworthy at some point here, and none of us are praiseworthy. So let's just take this with an act of a grain of salt, if you will. We are all we are all acting selfishly throughout our life. All of us do. And like we all avoid suffering. That's our natural state. We are all trying to avoid that suffering. But yet, that's not what Jesus is calling us to. He's calling us to be selfless and to be more suffering and to just not avoid that stuff and to do it in his name's sake. So we should not be mad. We should not take their sides. Okay. So Jesus calls them together, and because he sees a problem, he's going to try to address it right then and there. And he gives us a story, and he talks about the Gentiles. So he just got talking about the Gentiles he's going to be handed over to the Gentiles, but he's switching gears here. He's talking about greatness again. He's kind of bringing it down to their level. He's trying to calm this jealousy that's within his own camp. And he's talking about, okay, guys, I know you look at the Gentiles, and I know you look at them, and they have just harsh authority towards you. They have all the power, and you have none of it. And then you look at the high officials who are over top of the ruler, the guys with the spear, right? And they take advantage of you. So all the earthly examples that they have of rule and authority are of people who basically take advantage of other people. They use it to their own advantage in positions of power. And here James and John seem to be asking for positions of power. Astonishingly, right? They see tyrants among them, and they look at it and they say, I want to be a tyrant. And Jesus is like, no. That's the wrong way of thinking. We are not tyrants. You are seeking the kind of power that people have in earthly kingdoms. That's wrong. He says, instead of your jealousy of their power, instead of wanting to be like tyrants, instead of being a Stalin, a Hitler, a Putin, or whatever you want to fill in the blank, instead of looking for that kind of authority and power, instead do the opposite with your life, is what he's saying. He said, instead of power, seek service. Seek being a slave. Even though you have power, still serve. Even though you're free, still act like you're a slave. These are hard words. This is what he's calling us to. This is what greatness looks like, though. This is what Jesus himself demonstrated. Jesus has all the power in the universe, and he's born in a stable. He can command the stars to rise. He can make the sun and the moon come on. He can do whatever he wants. All the power. But he's not preoccupied with greatness in the sense that we are. He is preoccupied with serving and being a slave to all mankind. The way up is down. Pirates of the Caribbean got it right. Up is down, right? Like the way up is down. Some of you get that reference, some of you don't. Sorry if you don't, not a fan of the movie. All right. So he adds one more little piece here that I think this is the gospel, right? For the Son of Man did not come to be served, but to serve, and to give his life as a ransom. So not only are you a slave, not only are you a servant, but Jesus is a ransom payer. Now, I've seen people get this verse very wrong. Jesus has already demonstrated service and slave, but what he hasn't demonstrated is this ransom-paying act yet, right? He's going to. And some people think, well, is this because Satan holds us hostage and with sin, and Jesus is going to pay Satan this ransom? I'm going to tell you, no. That is the wrong way. Jesus crushes the head of Satan, right? He is never paying Satan for our souls. Who is he paying then? Who is the ransom for? The cup is prepared by the Father. He pays the Father. He drinks the Father's cup of wrath on our behalf. Jesus pays the cost of our redemption in blood to the Father. Why? The service Jesus is providing is payment, and he's paying it in full. The whole amount that is owed, he's paying it. We were not redeemed by perishable things. It's not gold. It's not silver. It's not paper money. It's by eternal blood, by an infinite, perfect being. That's what it costs to redeem us. Justice is being satisfied because we have offended an eternal God. Our sin is an eternal sin because we have offended eternal God. It is paid by an eternal being on a cross for us in his blood. He died in our place. This is called the vicarious substitutionary atonement, if you want to be fancy about it. He pays it all with every drop of his blood. So the story continues. And now it seems like this story isn't tied. And when I read this earlier, I wasn't sure how this connected. And now I'm going to bring it all in the full picture. You see, the gospel in a microcosm. As they're still marching down the road, another story unfolds before them. And it's the gospel laid out for us. Then they came to Jericho as Jesus and his disciples, together with a large crowd, were leaving the city. A blind man, Bartimaeus, which means son of Timaeus, was sitting on the roadside begging. When he heard that it was Jesus of Nazareth, he began to shout out, "Jesus, son of David, have mercy on me." And many rebuked him and told him to be quiet. But he shouted all the more, "Son of David, have mercy on me." And Jesus stopped and said, "Call him." So they called to the blind man, "Cheer up, on your feet, he's calling you." Throwing his cloak aside, he jumped to his feet and came to Jesus. "What do you want me to do for you?" Jesus asked him. The blind man said, "Rabbi, I want to see." "Go," said Jesus, "your faith has healed you now." Immediately he received his sight and followed Jesus along the road. So Jericho is about 15 miles from Jerusalem. They're heading to Jerusalem. They're going up to Jerusalem, right? They're passing through the town of Jericho. And 15 miles, that's not far away, right? They're like maybe a day or so's journey out from Jerusalem at this point. They're getting very close to his ultimate destination. And a blind man hears it's Jesus, so he begins to shout for mercy from Jesus, right? He can't see, so he's just standing in the midst. He's hearing this crowd talking about Jesus. People are probably walking by, and he's like, "Jesus has got to be around here somewhere. I'm just going to start shouting." So he starts shouting for mercy. And this is the gospel in a microcosm. Why? Because Jesus responds to our soul's cry for mercy. Our ultimate cry in our heart is that we need to have somebody pay our ransom. We need mercy bestowed on us. We need spiritual sight. Yes, this man was physically healed, but I think the spiritual healing was even more important because he becomes a follower after this, right? We all stand begging, desperate for Jesus to come. We are all shouting for mercy along the roadside. We are just waiting for the Savior to come by our way, that he might hear us, that he might take our sinful blindness away, take this punishment that is on us away. And you see here, the blind people are typically despised in this culture because a lot of people considered it was God's judgment for you to be blind. It was like you've done something wrong and you're under God's judgment. So the wrath of your sins is kind of already playing out on you here. It's total wrong way of thinking of it. But notice here, instead of helping the man, people in the crowd selfishly rebuke him and say, "Be quiet, you're annoying, shut up," kind of thing. Some will get in the way of us calling upon the God. Some of us are crying for God's mercy on our soul, and they will get in our way, and they will tell us to stop shouting. And what does this guy do? He shouts all the louder. Don't let people get in your way of your cry, of your heart, for God to show mercy on your soul. We can get his attention. Jesus will hear our cry. And guess what? He will stop, and he will call for us. And there is no shame in calling on him. It's a wonderful thing. So he calls the blind man, and notice the people say, "Cheer up." I wonder if it's the same people who are just rebuking him. I'd like to think it's a different set of people that were actually cheering for the guy and hoping that he would get a contact with Jesus, and not the same people that were that are annoyed by him. So the man throws his cloak aside. This kind of a spiritual picture of you don't need those clothes anymore. Those sinful clothes you've been wearing, guess what? You're going to get a new robe when you come over to Jesus. So if he stays blind, he's not even going to be able to find his cloak. But here's the thing. He's not going to stay blind. And he's going to get a new robe from Jesus in a sense. So he goes. It's a spiritual metaphor of getting new robes from Jesus. So he jumps to his feet. His excitement, he cannot contain himself. His heart's cry is to see the Lord. With joy, he comes to Jesus. Why? Because he hopes that he will be shown mercy. And indeed, he is shown mercy. Interestingly, Jesus, if you notice, if you caught it, Jesus responds to this man the same exact way that he responded to James and John's question. They were like, "What can I do for you?" What does this man get? Jesus says, "How can I serve you? What can I do for you?" Jesus is still willing. He's marching to his death, and he's willing to serve all the way to his death. We're called to serve just like Jesus. James and John, they're getting another visible demonstration of what God's heart is for us. The fact that he's willing to serve us in our deepest moments. So the blind man says, I want to see. And go, said Jesus, your faith has healed you. And then the amazing thing is he followed Jesus from here on out. He keeps following him. Jesus wants to hear our request. He wants to hear our hearts cry. He wants us to see spiritually, not just physical. That doesn't matter as much. Spiritual, yes, that matters. This should all be our heart's desire, is to see Jesus. That is what our heart's cry should be. Let our life be about trying to see him in everyday events and everyday things, that we follow after him. Pray with me this morning.